me start with sort of what's been accomplished at this point. We've gotten a one-page outline of principles from the White House. We have this Ryan Brady plan, blueprint that we've all been looking at. It's the one that's been around the longest. And we've had some hearings. What have we heard from the House Ways and Means Committee over these last couple of weeks?
So we haven't got a lot, right? As you say, there's a lot of plans. I think Speaker Ryan's plan is the most well-articulated. So it is fully laid out, unlike the Trump plan, which, as you say, is a one-page document.
Yeah.
The problem, though, with the Ryan plan is, even though it's well-articulated, it is revenue neutral, but that relies heavily on the border adjustment tax and the denial of interest deductibility, or deductibility of interest expense. Yeah. And those two items are facing pretty stiff headwinds, particularly in the Senate. The border adjustment tax doesn't appear that there is any Republican senator behind that. So given that, it just doesn't, it seems like this is pretty close to being dead in the water. And you take away those two, either of those two, the border adjustment tax or the elimination of the deductibility of interest expense, and the revenue neutrality falls apart. So it is really pretty dependent on those two keystones.
Yeah, I mean, how big a deal is it here that in that White House statement of principles, the BAT wasn't addressed? Is there still the possibility here, I suppose, that the White House could embrace it in the end, or are you convinced that that's not going to happen?
Everything we're hearing suggests that, if anything, they're moving further and further away from embracing the BAT. So given that, it just feels like there's no common ground. If you eliminate the BAT, as I said, the Ryan plan kind of falls apart, and the White House seems to be backing away from the BAT.
I raised the specter of a plan B. The former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, had floated a plan of his own for several years. That was what was being chewed over on Capitol Hill. Are there those who are saying, let's return to that? There are elements of that could stand a better chance of getting through than this.
Well, I think people are looking at it because it is at least a plan. However, we don't think it's going to go very far, particularly if we're going to prioritize corporate tax reform, which apparently is what the Republican leadership wants to do. And there are aspects of the Camp plan that actually go in the opposite direction of the Ryan plan. And we think that as it goes to the Joint Committee on Taxation for scoring for macroeconomic effects, it may fare worse than the Ryan plan. And so for that reason, we think the Camp plan, even though it is another fully fleshed out plan, it probably is going to be quite a bit less popular, even than the Ryan plan, which isn't very popular to begin with.
How problematic does the promise of 3% growth become here as the weeks drag on? It's baked into this tax reform plan, it's baked into the White House budget, it's baked into so much stuff when it comes to economic policy the White House is promulgating. You're not seeing 3% growth?
We're not seeing 3% growth. No, we're about half that for trend growth. I don't think the Ryan plan necessarily is dependent on 3% growth. The administration's budget is. It has already received a lot of blowback from economists across the spectrum. But I think in terms of corporate tax reform, the proposals, either Ryan, Camp, or other proposals, aren't necessarily all that contingent on 3%, but it does seem the president's budget is.
Very quickly here, with about 30 seconds left, when you get the minutes from the Fed today, what are you going to be looking for? Not what page are you going to flip to, but what are you going to look for in those minutes?
I think the most interesting information will come on their plans for balance sheet normalization. We heard some of that in the minutes to the March meeting, and we would expect some more progress there. I think the information on the economy and how they're viewing the economy may be a little less interesting, in part because right now what's most interesting is what's going on in inflation. And the most recent inflation news we received after the last meeting. So I think the news on the economy may be a little stale, but on balance sheet normalization.